For Crema Media's Polity, I'm Sane Dhlamini. EWN Reporter Mandy Wiener discusses her podcast compilation on Mbuyisa Makhubu's life titled Through the Cracks. What prompted you to compile Mbuyisa Makhubu's podcast Through the Cracks?
So it was twofold really. Firstly is we were all really hooked by the American podcast series Serial, which was a 12-episode investigation into a 1999 murder. And it was such compelling listening that we wanted to make a South African serial. And we thought this would be a good story to do. At the same time, we knew that the June 16th 40th anniversary was coming up. And we felt that every year the same people are rolled out and you do the same kind of interviews, and we really wanted to humanize the story of June 16. We wanted to tell an untold story. We wanted to contribute to the legacy of the individuals who were affected by June 16. And we felt that the story of Mbuyisa Makhubu was sufficiently untold, and also that it was such a compelling, interesting story that we had to tell it.
How long did it take for you to finish this incredible work?
So we started the investigation a year ago. So on and off for a year, we investigated the story, and then we worked intensively for about 2 months on finalizing interviews and editing. The editing process was quite laborious. It took a lot of time. There was a lot of attention to detail. And it's not often that you have this kind of opportunity to do long-form journalism like this. It takes a lot of resources. It's very expensive. So it was a long time in the making.
Your work has led to law change in Canada. Can you tell us more about that?
So what happened was, as a result of the podcast series, it was picked up by a Canadian newspaper, The Story, and reporters in Ottawa, in Canada, asked ministers there about the fact that refugees were being incarcerated, so undocumented people were being kept in prisons, essentially, with convicted criminals because they didn't really know what to do with them. And in the case of Hector Pieterson, who people think is Mbuyisa Makhubu, he was the longest serving detainee in Canada. He was kept for 12 years in a prison in Canada because they just didn't know where to send him. He didn't have any documentation, and as a result, ministers in Canada have agreed to change their policy on what to do with refugees. It wasn't only because of our story. I think that was the catalyst. You know, there's been a lot of talk in Canada, a lot of human rights pressure being placed on the government, but it was as a direct result of questions relating to this story that they announced the policy change.
You have attempted to interview South African officials on Mbuyisa's story, but you have not been successful. Who did you try to speak to, and why do you think they have declined?
So the only people who would speak to us was the South African High Commissioner, Mbuyisa, who obviously represents DIRCO, the International Relations Department, and he gave us an extensive interview about what's been done. And then the National Prosecuting Authority's Missing Persons Task Team has a case open on Mbuyisa, and they've spoken to us very briefly about what they've done. But politically, nobody wants to touch the story. So we have put in requests for a year now with the former Arts and Culture Minister, Paul Mashatile, who really drove this entire process, and no interview. We've put in a request with the former Home Affairs Minister, Dhlamini, who was involved. She didn't want to give an interview. The current Home Affairs Minister also doesn't want to speak about it. And then the current Arts and Culture Minister, who really is supposed to be dealing with this case, who's the person who's supposed to be responsible for bringing back Mbuyisa Makhubu, he doesn't want to give us an interview. The ANC has also not given us an interview. So politically, this is like a hornet's nest that nobody wants to touch.
What was the shocking discovery on the information you have gathered about Mbuyisa?
Well, I think the most important thing that we discovered was the decision to not bring Hector Pieterson back to South Africa, or that determined that he was not Mbuyisa Makhubu, was based on a DNA test. And it came to light through our investigations that the DNA test was done on Raoul Makhubu, who everybody assumed was Mbuyisa's brother. But it emerged that there was this long buried family secret that Mbuyisa was the product of an affair, and that he did not in fact share a father with Mbuyisa, and the test that was done, the DNA test that was done, was a paternal DNA test. So that would explain why the results were inconclusive. And that's why so many members of the family want another DNA test to be done, because they still believe that Victor Vinitau is Mbuyisa Makhubu. And we also took photographs of both men to a facial comparison expert. And the results really surprised us. What he found, that there was nothing to rule out the possibility that it could be the same man, and there were a lot of similarities.
Ambassador Mbuyisa Makhubu has committed to put this matter to rest by facilitating that a second DNA test be conducted to Victor Vinitau. Do you know why Mr. Vinitau is refusing to cooperate with taking a second DNA test?
So, the South African police have taken DNA from Mbuyisa Makhubu's son, Tato, and they want to match it against Victor Vinitau's DNA profile, which the Canadians have. But the Canadians can't give the South Africans the DNA profile because Victor Vinitau is refusing to cooperate. And he's refusing to cooperate all along, really, because he says that he's already given his DNA once. Why should he give it a second time if they couldn't get it right the first time? He also has a reluctance to cooperate with South African officials because he fears the government in South Africa. He fears the ANC because he says that they killed his parents. And also that he doesn't want to cooperate at all because he's not Mbuyisa Makhubu. He says he is not Mbuyisa.
If it happens that Mr. Vinitau is Mbuyisa, will you be willing to continue his story?
Absolutely. You know, there's definitely a portion of the people that we've spoken to who genuinely believe that Victor Vinitau is Mbuyisa Makhubu. He's simply saying that he's not because he's mentally unstable and he's not quite sure who he is. But if he is Mbuyisa Makhubu, then we'll absolutely continue to pursue this.
Was it easy to access the information on Mbuyisa?
Not really. You know, we were able to access archives. So at Lily's Leaf, for example, we were able to archive all the newspaper footage. We also went to the SABC and got all of their footage of the day. But, you know, for example, we went to Home Affairs to ask them for their records and also if they could assist us with trying to work out who this Canadian man is, and they weren't very cooperative at all. So from an official point of view, it wasn't very easy, but from our own investigations, we were able to dig up new information. We managed to find somebody who shared a dorm room with him in Nigeria, in the Warri College, a man who's now living in London who had a photograph of Mbuyisa. And that's so rare to find a photograph even. The family didn't have one. So it took a lot of digging on our part.
Why a podcast instead of a book?
So many people have asked that question. We felt that this was a different kind of way to tell a story. And we also thought that you know, the audio perspective was so powerful, the way that people were speaking about this, that we wanted to take people along on the journey. You know, I don't think the story is necessarily long enough or detailed enough for a book. And we also want to change the way people think. You know, we wanted people to, particularly in South Africa, to get as passionate about podcasts and radio documentaries as the rest of the world is. And it really is, you know, the golden era of podcasting at the moment. If you look at how successful Serial was, if you look at new podcasts that are being launched constantly. Malcolm Gladwell, for example, launched a podcast last week that is incredibly successful already. And we really wanted to try a new medium in South Africa to see if people would get hooked the way that we've been hooked.
Are you amazed at the interest of the public after this podcast was launched?
Yes and no. I knew people would be passionate about the story because it's such a fascinating story and such an important, powerful story as well, that I knew that people would get into it. I would like to see fewer people asking for books instead of podcasts because it would be great if people would get into that whole concept of listening and following on the journey and understanding how that all works. And hopefully we can do more of those in the future.
That was EWN reporter Mandy Wiener speaking to Crema Media's Polity about her podcast compilation on Mbuyisa Makhubu's life titled Through the Cracks.